It's stunning to hear these negotiations. It's amazing to hear what Micheal Cohen, how he spoke to Donald Trump, what he was willing to do for Donald Trump, how he's walking Donald Trump through all of this. Legally, what do you hear?
Well, one of the reasons it's so stunning, Allison, is that you're hearing attorney-client communications, and you never really hear that because you have a privilege attached to it. And so, on the one hand, you see that there is an effort by perhaps Rudy Giuliani, when they decided not to assert that privilege here, to say we'd like the people in the court of public opinion to decide whether or not this makes Micheal Cohen look good or makes Donald Trump look bad, and they're banking on the latter. Number two, what I really hear here is the idea of what MJ talked about, that contemporaneous knowledge. That up till now, we haven't known whether or not the President of the United States, while he was then candidate Donald Trump, really truly knew about the allegations or about the AMI company trying to suppress the story of Karen McDougal, and whether or not it would have some impact on the election. You hear him allude to, we've got to delay the Ivana Trump disclosures till after, and he kind of has an ellipse at the end of that, followed by communication about whether or not they have to suppress all the stories or all the things that David Pecker, the head of AMI, may have in his pocket. And so what you're seeing here is somebody with knowledge, which goes against exactly what he told us all along, but doesn't really move the needle that far because there's not a specific mention of the election.
No, although if AMI, which of course is the company that owns the Inquirer, if they were doing this to help Donald Trump, that would be a campaign expenditure, and that opens up serious legal questions here. And the contemporaneous knowledge of the president is crucial in that sense. So when you hear the president ask, so what do we got to pay for this? $150, that tells you his head is in this game before the election, after the Inquirer was already in this. And also, David Gregory, I'll point out that Micheal Cohen says all the stuff, all the stuff, opening up the door to the possibility there's more than just this Karen McDougal thing.
Well, and that's what I think is important, John. I think that what they are doing, what Micheal Cohen is doing through Lanny Davis, is really going to war with the president and his team, suggesting that, hey, this is what I got, and maybe there's a lot more that he could talk about that would be embarrassing enough for the president to maybe give him a pardon, which may be really what's at play here, or maybe there's more that Cohen knows that may be relevant to what the special prosecutor, Bob Mueller, is looking into. Right now, there's a separation between that case, that investigation, and what they're doing in the Southern District of New York related to campaign finance violations, potentially. He could also be facing, Micheal Cohen could, bank fraud charges as well for some of these payments. So the political distraction is the president lying, if that's what's going on here, despite their denials about these payments right before the election. What could be worse about knowledge of the campaign finance violations, and what more does Micheal Cohen have? That's the question that's here. The other piece of this, just the insight that the tape provides, is the kind of world around Donald Trump and the campaign, which you have to assume is true in the White House as well. I mean, here is this frankly sycophantic sounding lawyer talking about, oh, I got this covered, and he's talking so fast, and I'm all over this, and by the way, great poll, and you're looking great, and everything is fantastic. I mean, there's just an intensity to that exchange that I think is revealing.
I agree. It is the world around him that is, I think, this is a fascinating window into and about that world, John Avlon. You know, people are willing to lie for Donald Trump, we see. And, I mean, look, it's no surprise that a candidate who is caught having an affair, or that information about an affair could come out, would want to suppress that, okay? I think we've seen that movie before, okay? But the idea that people around him, I mean, Hope Hicks on November 4th to the Wall Street Journal, Hope Hicks, here, I'll read it, a Trump campaign spokeswoman said of the agreement with Ms. McDougal, we have no knowledge of any of this, okay? Fair, maybe she didn't, okay? She said that Ms. McDougal's claim of an affair with Mr. Trump was, quote, totally untrue. How could she know that?
Can I tell you something? Yeah. But maybe she didn't know. But when she says we have no knowledge of this, that implies we, the entire campaign, which includes the candidate. So that is a lie.
Well,
whether or not she knows it's a lie, it is a campaign
I hear you. I don't want to dissect the whether or not she was lying, but the part where she says totally untrue is unknowable for her.
I'm going lie.
I know you are. You're going full lie. But my point is this, that they're willing. If you spent years with Donald Trump, okay, there is no way that you could ever say that the idea that he had an affair was totally untrue. Right. Every single person in New York City who ever read the New York Post knew it was not totally untrue that he could have an affair.
There should be a presumption that he had an affair. But I think a couple things. First of all, it is the press secretary's job to know whether something is true when they speak to the press. Second of all, we've seen a pattern that lying is a measure of loyalty in this campaign and in this administration. And I think what's so explosive about the tape isn't just the fact that his consigliere is turned on the President of the United States, and they say there are other tapes, but it is part of this larger recognition that the Trump team's best defense at this point is don't believe your eyes and ears. The President said it yesterday at a VFW rally. And now they're confronting this tape where people have to decide whether they're going to believe their ears or believe the President and his lawyer, because that spin that he's actually saying, no, don't pay with cash, is pretty desperate.
What you are reading, what you are seeing is not what's happening, is what the president said. We just heard with our own ears what transpired between the two. And to me, it is a huge window into what Rudy Giuliani was doing when he released the notion of this tape last Friday. We were all talking, Laura, last Friday. Why is Giuliani coming out with this? Why is he telling us all about this? It's because he wanted to put his spin on it early. He used the word exculpatory. Now, I don't know whether or not the president said cash or check or cash or no check. You can't tell. It may not be incriminating, but it is not exculpatory. It just doesn't say what Rudy Giuliani definitively says it says.
You know, when you try to launch a preemptive strike, the only reason you would do so is if you fear that the person actually has something to wage against you in the form of a war. And what they were anticipating by doing that preemptive strike last week is saying, listen, I'm going to take some of the air out of the sails of Micheal Cohen if this comes out, which it likely would have come out. He was trying to get ahead of it, but he's trying to get ahead of it for a legal reason, I think, as well. Because I think you have to realize they have the crime fraud exception to the attorney-client privilege. And although we have heard from Donald Trump only a sliver of his legal work was ever done by Micheal Cohen, there is still the notion of, well, the attorney-client privilege is only as good until you actually commit a crime or you and your lawyer are conspiring in furtherance of a crime. If that's the case, then it has to be litigated. They were trying to get ahead of the public narrative, as well as even having to litigate the issue of the crime fraud exception, which, by the way, Nixon never even had to as well, because you recognize trying to get ahead of that as well. Just ask John Dean about that notion. And so I think on two different notions here, he had this idea, and he was trying to make sure that whatever came out, they had their thumb on that particular.
The reason the Nixon thing's relevant is one of the smoking gun tapes was John Dean talking with Nixon, and Nixon specifically says, I know where we can get $1 million cash. It won't be easy, but we can do it. And that, again, I think the specter of a presidential candidate, now President of the United States, talking about a cash payoff is significant, it's historically resonant, and it's just as ugly as it sounds.
So what do we got to pay for this? $150.
Right.
Question mark.
Yeah.
It's not $1 million. It's not Nixonian. It's not $1 million.
No, it's yes.
But it's 150. A discount rate. Part of the deal.
It's a discount rate because, you know, for frequent service. But what I think is significant is that, you know, in this context, when you're paying cash, it's always done to hide. And the idea, I mean, listen to the tape. Cohen is definitely saying no, 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 no. So, you know, we can't directly parse the exact context, but it's hard to imagine you saying, no, 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 we shouldn't pay with a check.
Look, I don't, you know, the thing is you listen to it and you don't know. What I do know is that the questions that would have been raised had we heard this tape out of nowhere, we would have all been asking, oh, my gosh, did the president just say pay cash?
Right.
And that's why Giuliani came out beforehand and said he's definitively not saying cash.
And keep in mind, it's also explicitly within the context of Cohen saying, I'm going to set up a shell company to make the payoff. You don't do that if you're paying cash.
David Gregory, very quickly,
Yeah. I would just say, you know, the larger picture here is a president who, frankly, is known for this kind of behavior, you know, that he was trying to cover up. And we've seen politicians do this before. But he was sufficiently worried during the campaign when other tapes came out, the Access Hollywood tape, that all of this could hurt him. And he is in a position now where he's got to wonder whether even his most stalwart supporters look at this and say, you know, there's some line being crossed with the sleaze. We haven't seen it yet. He's been able to bloody up the narrative around the Mueller investigation enough to retain that support. But you look at something like this and the unpredictability of it, in case Cohen has more, that certainly is hitting home with the Trump team thinking, you know, there's a political piece of this that we just may not want to endure.
Obviously, we have much more to discuss here. The timing, I'm interested in the campaign finance aspect of it.
Turning into George Orwell in 1984. CNN has learned exclusively that the White House will no longer tell the public when the president speaks to foreign leaders. They are suspending this long-standing practice of releasing summaries of those phone calls to the public. What has happened to transparency? Joining us now is David Gregory and CNN Global Affairs analyst Max Boot. Max, tell me if you agree with this. I feel as though something shifted in Helsinki. Something happened in Helsinki where it was really sort of the most crystal clear first time where the public didn't have to take the press's word for what happened. The public got to see with their own eyes the president blame America and Vladimir Putin say that, yes, he did want Donald Trump to win. And since that